Good evening and a warm welcome to all the viewers who have joined us. I am Avinash Singh, and on behalf of RPG Life Sciences, I welcome all for today's webinar on pivotal role of diuretics in management of chronic heart failure and resistant hypertension. To talk more on this, we have with us Dr. Gaurav Chaya as our guest speaker for today. Welcome, sir, and thank you for joining us. To give a brief intro about Gaurav, sir, sir has been working as a physician, diabetologist, and cardiologist at his private clinic, Shivam Medicare Clinic in Ahmedabad since more than last 15 years. He graduated with the MBBS degree from BJ Medical College, Ahmedabad, and obtained the postgraduate MD degree in internal medicine from Gujarat University. Dr. Chaya also completed a diploma in diabetology from MV Diabetes Institute, Chennai. Sir has been active in several national and regional medical associations, such as the Research Society for Study of Diabetes in India and Association of Physicians of India. He has attended many national and international medical conferences and made presentations on several occasions as well. Moreover, Sir is regularly conducting health education programs and other health related activities for various institutions, hospitals, and medical organizations, and is active in public health initiative and social work. So, without any further ado, I welcome Dr. Chaya and would request him to carry forward the session. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I greet all my colleagues who have joined this session. Uh, Actually, I am given the role by this RPG Life Science to talk on diuretics in a chronic heart failure and the resistance hypertension. So, I'll be definitely talking about what this talk will be. Like I will be talking about diuretics in the basics, then ACC AHA heart failure guidelines. I'll be talking about 2016 ESC guidelines also for diuretics, and also diuretic in resistance hypertension. And then at the end, I'll just conclude my talk. So, what is heart failure? We need to know about this. Before starting all this talk, I think I must clarify what is heart failure. We all know heart failure. Previously, it was termed as congestive cardiac failure or so and so forth. But as we increased our knowledge, we come to know that this is heart failure and it's a clinical syndrome. Basically, it's having a structural or functional impairment of ventricular filling of ejection of blood. So eventually patient gets dyspnea and fatigue, and there is limit in the exercise tolerance, and eventually there is fluid retention, and then we find pulmonary and or splanchnic congestions or peripheral edema. So all this in together creates a heart failure. So what are the manifestations we see for congestive heart failure? So we always see like swelling in the ankles and foot with a very big pitting edema. So many times there is a swelling of the abdomen, and seeing the ascites also in terms of umbilical is coming out. Pulmonary edema is seen so many times, and patient comes with coughing, tiredness, shortness of breath, and so many times orthopnea, or there is so many times we are what seeing is pumping action of the heart grows weaker. So there is pleural effusion in the patient. So seeing this, we need to use the diuretic medications. What are the various diuretic medications we know? We all know about various things like high efficacy loop diuretics, which we usually use in our patients like furosemide, bumetanide, torsemide. So torsemide we are using, furosemide we are using. Then there are moderate efficacy diuretics like which reduces potassium also. Those are like thiazides, hydrochlorothiazide, and benzofluorothiazides. And then the thiazide related diuretics like metolazone, chlorthalidone, and indapamide. So these are the thiazide groups. And then there are various low efficacy diuretics, which are potassium sparing diuretics like aldosterone antagonists, spironolactone, and eplerenone. Then trimethyl amiloride. Then there are mannitol, which osmotically reduces against the diuresis. Then carbonic anhydrase inhibitors like acetazolamide and dorzolamide. So this is a brief about the diuretic drugs. I'll be talking about more of a thiazide diuretics and loop diuretics, as well as some amount of aldosterone inhibitors. So what are thiazide diuretics are? They actually act on the early part of distal tubule of the nephron, and by these they inhibit sodium and chloride symporters and reabsorption of all these things that increases the sodium chloride excretion. So almost 5 to 10% of medium efficacy is noted in this, and in that sodium is exchanged with potassium, and so there is a potassium loss and leading to hypokalemia. So distal tubule loses the potassium and we find hypokalemia in this type of patients again. So metalazone, like additional action on this type of events, which effectively at a low GFR, it works hard, and it so many times it's been tried to reduce the refractory edema. So they are hypotensive in action. That's why we are using thiazide diuretics as a drug of choice in hypertension. It is also hyperuricemic, and it also causes the hyperglycemia in so many of our patients. So we need to inhibit insulin. By insulin inhibition, this leads to diabetes. So we need to use judiciously about all these drugs. Even we are finding hyperlipidemia like cholesterol and triglyceride, and we can use this drug in hypertension, edema, like cardiac, hepatic, renal, or renal stone, all type of things. So metalazone can be useful even when GFR is as low as 15 ml per minute. So we can use thiazide type of diuretics at very low GFR also, and that improves the diuresis, and eventually we get reduction in the workload. So there are n number of thiazide diuretics available in market. We all know about chlorothiazides since 1957, then the chlorthalidone, hydrofluometide, indapamide, and our use of indapamide is also there, and we are definitely using hydrochlorothiazide with a very good amount of experience in hypertensive patients. And if we see dose, then almost 2.5 milligram to 100 milligram dose is there for various things, and duration of action varies between 6 to 48 hours. So saying about the loop diuretics, I'll be talking about potassium sparing diuretic aldosterone. Like aldosterone, what it does, it's from the adrenal gland. Aldosterone is there working, which regulates the sodium potassium, and it actually eventually sodium water retention and potassium loss is being uh, taken care of. And then there are non-genomic functions also like fibrosis, atherosclerosis, CVD, CKD, and stroke, which can be been seen with aldosterone. So potassium sparing diuretics like spironolactone, K-canrelone, eplerenone are aldosterone antagonists, and they can be used by 25 to 100 milligram per day. Uh, at present, we are using eplerenone and spironolactone oral route, and there are certain directly acting potassium sparing agents like amiloride and triamterene, which can be used with loop diuretics like furosemide or thiazide. And then there are various drugs like spironolactone, which acts on cortical segment of distal tubules and competitive antagonist of aldosterone. They eventually antagonizes aldosterone. They cause the potassium retention uh, by potassium sparing effect, and thus, if it is used continuously without monitoring potassium, it can lead to hyperkalemia. Then what we find, mild cellulritic natriuresis of and we need to have 3% of NaCl in some of my patients. So we need not to use this type of spironolactone alone as diuretics. So we must use some other molecules with this type of drugs, and it is useful when combined with thiazide or furosemide or torsemide. So if we are using for congestive heart failure, it can be used as an adjunctive therapy as it retards the disease progression and it reduces the mortality. And the edema reduction is there in cases of cirrhosis and nephrotic syndrome. So this thiazide or furosemide is used in refractory edema also. and it counteracts the potassium loss due to thiazides and furosemide. So if we are using this type of molecule with thiazide group, so naturally it improves the potassium loss, and we get good potassium levels. Hypertension is also been seen to have good control in case of combination with of thiazide. And if we are using for Cohen syndrome, it is definitely good to have comfortable on primary hyperaldosteronism. So even hyperkalemia risk is also been there if we are using spironolactone in cases of chronic renal failure patients, or a patient who is taking a ACE inhibitor or angiotensin receptor antagonist like losartan, and if we are giving them potassium supplementation. So if we are using spironolactone, we need to take care about all these parameters, and we must avoid providing them large amount of potassium. And if we are using this structure, like for gynecomastia or impotence in male, is also been seen because of related to steroid structure disturbances, and hirsutism and menstrual irregularities in females can be also noted. So these are the side effects of spironolactone we need to know, and we need to keep in our mind when we are treating our patient. So again, amiloride and triamterene are directly acting on distal tubule and convalescent ducts, and they are weak diuretics, never used alone. So we don't use this type of molecules alone. They are indirectly inhibiting the potassium secretion, and so uh, adrenal receptors and precautions like spironolactone should be taken care of, but usually they don't do any sexual dysfunction. So it is safe, at least as far as gynecomastia is concerned. So saying learned about all this, we need to know about loop diuretics like furosemide, torsemide, and bumetanide. And these are the drugs. They inhibit a couple of sodium, potassium, and chloride co-transporters, and it has a very high ceiling, and it's usually most efficacious in of these groups. They eliminate more water than sodium, and but they have the side effect of ototoxicity and hypokalemia. And we can use this type of loop diuretics for edema of either a congestive heart failure, cirrhosis, nephrotic syndrome, or even acute renal failure, hyperkalemia, or hypercalcemia. So this is a cartoon showing various uh, receptors and all. If we see this red circled area, which is a loop of agent, and it is showing that sodium, potassium, and 2 chloride are being absorbed from the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle, and then we see sodium chloride, thiazide working. So this cartoon is showing various things which where the various medications work. So our area is third. So and loop diuretics again have if we compare all three loop diuretics, then the highest potency is with bumetanide. Uh, Bioavailability wise, all are almost same. The furosemide has the least bioavailability of 10 also in some of the patients. And if we see oral intravenous dosing, then 2 gem 1 for furosemide. Rest of all can be used at 1 gem 1 ratio. Time of onset, if we see absorption effect by food, yes, torsemide has no such effect, but other two has. And if we see duration, then it is having between 4 to 6, 6 to 8, or 6 to 16 hours. So best is torsemide. So we'll go in detail about the 2030 ACCF and AHA heart failure guidelines. As we all know, some patients present without signals or signs or symptoms of volume overload, and that's why the term of heart failure is now preferred over the congestive heart failure, as I started in my beginning. And this is where we need to understand that all our patients are not congestive. They might be just simply heart failure. So I'm going to say something about the classification of heart failure. Like heart failure has four different parts: heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction in a borderline ejection fraction zone, and heart failure with preserved ejection fraction with improved ejection fraction. Like patient with HFpEF previously had HFrEF is now improved, so he is been classified as HFpEF with improved ejection fraction. In a borderline, EF is 41 to 49. If a patient is having ejection fraction of more than 50%, then these are the patients who are told as HEPA or a diastolic heart failure. And if a patient is having ejection fraction of less than 40%, then he is in a systolic heart failure, or he is having heart failure of reduced ejection fraction. Knowing about this classification, we need to understand about the stages of ACC-AHA, the symptomatology part, and then NYHA classes. So they have classes of stage A, B, C, or D. According to the development of CHF heart, or structural disorders, if there is structural disorder and not developed any symptom of CHF, then the stage B. Then if there is past or current symptoms of CHF, symptom not that grievous, then stage C. And if patient is having end-stage disease, naturally they are termed as stage D. So, but NYHA has a class of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they are intermingled with each other. So, eventually, class 3A and 3B are also been identified by NYHA through the dyspnea at rest and recent dyspnea at rest. So if there is no dyspnea, then it is class 3A. So these type of all classifications are now useful in deciding our line of treatment and our overall functionality. So let's talk about the stage A, the patients who are at high risk and whose risk factor of heart failure like hypertension is there. So they are going to have certain things. So what is the recommendation? There is class 1 recommendation is to control the hypertension and lipid disorders, and we need to go for contemporary guidelines to lower the risk of heart failure. If we are controlling good amount of hypertension and lipid disorder, naturally we are going to have good comfortable control over the risk of heart failure. And other conditions may be leading to contributing to heart failure must be controlled, like obesity, diabetes, tobacco use, and cardiotoxic agents. So we should control or avoid all these type of things, and the level of evidence is C. Naturally, if we are having a patient with heart failure stage B, where there is a structural heart disorder but no symptoms, like patient coming to us like acute coronary syndrome and having a normal ejection fraction, then the treatment plan is different. And if there is a reduced ejection fraction, then the class 1 recommendation to prevent symptomatic heart failure. And we need to use S inhibitors, ARB, beta blockers, statins, and nowadays ARNI agent also can be used in this type of patients. If patient is not having any history of MI or acute coronary syndrome, the patient's recommendation is to prevent the symptomatic heart failure. So here the blood pressure should be controlled with ACE inhibitor, beta blocker again, or ARBs. If a patient of stage B again with a structural heart disorder but having no symptom comes, then the placement of ICD is again indicated to a recommendation when a patient is having ejection fraction of less than 30% with a wide QRS area, and if there is a reasonable expectation of survival with good functional tests to be considered in this type of patients. So overall, 40-day post MI, these type of patients can be done for ICD insertion. And there are CCBs, like it is said that it is harming, and the recommendation is class 3. So calcium channel blockers are negative inotropic effect wise, it's to be avoided in this type of patients. And if a patient is coming with heart failure stage C, where the previous or current symptoms of heart failure is there, with underlying structural heart problem, and but managed with medical treatment, we need to understand the use of sodium restriction, and the level of recommendation is class 2A, where it is been at least established as by multiple trials. And there is, if there is a symptomatic heart failure, we need to go for sodium restriction by any at least half of the intake. And if a patient is having heart failure with sleep apnea, then again we need to go with treatment like positive CPAP administration continuously, and the class 2A recommendation is there for this type of recommendations. So what are the various pharmacological treatment for stage C of HFrEF and what are the recommendations. So I'll be focusing on diuretics. And if a patient of stage 3 or NYHA class 1 to 4 any part of HFrEF comes to us, then we need first to go with class 1 level of evidence, and that is having ACE inhibitor, ARB, and beta blocker. These are the drugs which we must use. And if a patient is still having all volume overload, class 2 or 4 patient, up to 2 to 4, then we can add loop diuretics, and the evidence is class 1 level of evidence C. Again, if a patient is having persistently symptomatic African American with NYHA class 3 or 4, then we can add hydral or nitrates in this type of patients, and the level of evidence is A with class 1 indication. So it is recommended by all the societies. And if a patient is having NYHA class 2 to 4 patients with estimated creatinine of more than 30 milliliter per minute or potassium less than 5, then we can have aldosterone antagonist into these patients with definitely a strong class of 1 level of evidence A. So these are the various drugs like loop diuretics, hydrogen nitrates, and aldosterone antagonists, which can be added over the S inhibitor and ARB and beta blockers. So the first thing is we have to go with S inhibitor and or ORBs or beta blockers. So there are various recommendations by ACC/AHA since 2013, and they say that diuretics are recommended in patients with HFrEF who have evidence of fluid retention unless contraindicated to improve the symptoms. So diuretics like loop diuretics preferred as a diuretic agent. Thiazides can be preferred if a patient is hypertensive with heart failure and mild fluid retention is there. And we can use this by increasing the urinary sodium excretion, and it is also helping to decrease the physical signs of fluid retention, and it improves the symptom and exercise tolerance in patients with heart failure. So we need to use diuretics uh, by selecting the patients. Like if a patient is having history of evidence of fluid retention, we must use diuretics, and it is to be combined with ACE inhibitor, beta blocker, and aldosterone antagonist, so that we can prevent various side effects of all these agents. And if we are using diuretics, uh, then there has to be initiation dose and maintenance dose to be understood. Like loop diuretics are always preferred, and it is to be initiated with low doses, like zero point 0.5 to 1 kilogram, where the dose is increased gradually to lose the weight of zero point 0.5 to 1 kilogram per daily generally. And that the goals are no clinical evidence of fluid retention is our goal in giving all these things. And once we find this no evidence of fluid retention, then we can keep maintenance dose on diuretics to prevent the recurrent volume overloads. And again, the recommendation says that diuretics, if used for high dietary sodium and NSAIDs and impaired renal function perfusion purpose, then this leads to diuretic resistance. And the treatment is always by giving IV intravenous diuretics or combination of different classes like metolazone with loop diuretics. If we combine, then we can prevent one single diuretic issues. And there are various risks of treatment of diuretics like electrolyte and fluid imbalance. Then hypotension or azotemia can be noted. Depletion of potassium and magnesium is also been seen in this type of patients. And we need to understand the recommendations of pharmacological therapy for management of stage 3 HFrEF. So this is just summarizing, like diuretics are recommended as class 1 recommendations. If it is combined with ACE inhibitors, it is going to cause harm. So usually it is to be avoided if we are combining all three together. So need to be more judicious. Then beta blocker is to be now to be given, which was proven to reduce mortality in this type of patients. So now the class 1 recommendation is to use beta blocker. Then aldosterone receptor antagonists are also good for NOH class 2 to 4, where the ejection fraction is less than 35, and the recommendation of class 1 evidence is also noted. And we can definitely combine hydrolazine and isosorbate dinitrate who cannot be given ACE inhibitors or ARBs. So the class of for in recommendation is level 1 to 8. So this is what we can have. Decoxin is also beneficial in patients. The level of evidence is 2A, and omega-3 uh, polyunsaturated fatty acid supplementation is also reasonable to use as an adjunctive therapy, and the recommendation level 2A. So these are the various recommendations for stage C HFrEF patients. And we need to understand again the recommendation for treatment of stage C. And this is showing that if we are using diuretics, uh, should be used for relief of symptoms due to volume overload, and the evidence of level 1. And it is to be again used for systolic and diastolic blood pressure, should be controlled according to the published clinical practice guidelines to get proper. So for us, it is important to control the blood pressure and to control the volume overload. That is what is more important. Next. Uh, so recommendation again says that aldosterone receptor antagonist might be considered to decrease hospitalization. And even 2017 Heart Failure Society of America focused update also showed the same thing. And this is the current thing is recommendation is now reflects the new RC randomized controlled trial data, and that's why we must understand the use of aldosterone receptor antagonist in our day-to-day practice. And if we see the recommendation therapy of hospitalized heart failure patients, so many times we are having a heart failure patient hospitalized with a fluid overload, must be given intravenous diuretics. Again, thrombosis and thromboembolism prophylaxis must be started in these type of patients, and initiation of beta blocker therapy in a low dose is also recommended as a class of recommendation 1. And again, heart failure patient receiving loop diuretic therapy should receive the initial parenteral dosage of greater than or equal to their chronic oral daily dose. So that's what we need to follow in our day-to-day practice. So this was about AHA. Now I'm going to talk about 2016 ESC guidelines for the diagnosis and treatment of acute chronic heart failure. This is a busy slide, and it won't be seen that easily, but I'm going to narrate the highlighted areas. Like diuretics, the patient if comes with a FREF to our class, then the green boxes are class 1 and yellow boxes are class 2. So if we see diuretics to relieve the symptom and sign is good for congestion reduction is a class 1 indication. Again, we can add uh, aldosterone antagonist or M MR antagonist, and uptitrate the dosages as a class 1. And we can use ARNI to replace the ACE inhibitor, and we can evaluate the need for CRT in this type of patients. Ivabradine is still class 2A. The rest of the thing we can understand. Go ahead. We can see the symptomatic part, or we can see the resistance symptoms, and if there is no resistance, we can consider reducing the diuretic dose. So, what are the use of diuretics in heart failure? We can definitely frequently using the loop diuretics for acute heart failure registry ADHERE trial, which said almost more than 1 lakh hospitalized patients, and 90% treated with intravenous loop diuretics and 30% showed resistant to diuretic therapies. And the signs and symptoms were breathlessness, pulmonary, rales, or peripheral edema were seen into patients of 66 to 89% of patients. That on what are the clinical benefits of diuretics? So there was a Cochrane meta-analysis done of 14 trials of almost 525 participants, and what they found that lower the risk of mortality, diuretics versus placebo, and the odds ratio was also significantly better towards diuretics part, and let's say the hospitalization admission rate was also noted if a patient was given diuretics, and there is also improved exercise capacity, diuretics versus active control. So patients are improving functionally also if we are using diuretics in our patient. And that's why if our patient is having mild congestive heart failure, then initial management should be thiazide diuretics, and or we can definitely use loop diuretics like furosemide, torsemide, or bumetanide. If patient is having principal drugs or decreased absorption in the severe heart failure, more than 4 hours for peak risk. And so all these are the indications. And furosemide is having a variable bioavailability, and bumetanide and torsemide is better, and predictability, bioavailability as far as 100% is achieved. So if we see this response curve, one third or the one fourth of the natriuretic response to a maximally effective dose of loop diuretics of NYHA 2 or 3 were seen. And if we are still going ahead, then the administration of the moderate doses at the decreased interval can elevate the response. And so eventually, if we still increase, and the large doses will be required to cause no change if in the response at the later end. So we need to understand use of correct dose at the correct time. And that's why torsemide is a better drug than furosemide if we see this statistical data. Like torsemide and bumetanide are more effective as they are reducing the symptoms such as dyspnea, fatigue, and it is also increasing the weight loss. So there is more weight loss in with the torsemide, and there is decrease in the rates of hospital readmission, and all-cause mortality is also being reduced if we are using torsemide. And this is achieved because of higher bioavailability of torsemide and bumetanide, and torsemide has a longer half-life as compared to furosemide, and bumetanide is nowadays a preferred agent. If we see intravenous loop diuretics, then as compared to oral, then what we find is they are more potent than oral diuretics if we are using it. And this is the actually one of the study which was there of 1,377 patients of having NYHA class 2 to 3 CHF, and what they were done, they were studied for 12 months on a standard therapy, were given torsemide or furosemide or other diuretics. So torsemide receiving patients were almost 778, so big number. If we see the historic study results, what we found is a mortality reduction of almost 2.2% versus 4.5%, and the p-value is 0.05. So, and if see functional improvement in patients, then there is a 45.8% of functional improvement with a p-value of very statistically significant of 0.0017. So, it is definitely showing one third or one fourth of improvement in the functional activity of patients, and there is also less risk of low serum potassium if we are using torsemide. Uh, so if we see this torsemide versus furosemide meta-analysis, then again there were 19 studies were combined of almost 19,000 patients, and follow-up of 15 months was there. And what they found that NYHA class 3, 4 or 1, 2 were just given all these, and more improvement in functional status from NYHA class 3 to 1 or 2 was noted if we are using torsemide. So this Cochrane meta-analysis of 8 trials insignificantly uh, increases in diuretic effect and better safety profile. Continuously infusion from then, the bolus was also studied and it was published. What it showed, like diuretic resistance, if a patient was what is the mechanism of diuretics. So if a patient is having cardiac failure, they are given loop diuretic in administration like inhibition, then it has a inhibition of macula densa, then there is negative sodium balance. Eventually, renin and angiotensin aldosterone system gets deregulated, and then there is secondary hypoaldosteronism, and that's why there is reduced distal sodium delivery. Eventually, thiazide diuretics and mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists uh, work on this, and loop diuretic resistance is being generated. Here only thiazide can help, and natriuretic dose of mineralocorticoid antagonists can lead to hypertrophy of distal nephron, and eventually loop diuretic failure is being seen. So if we are using loop diuretics with potassium sparing diuretics, then the RAILS trial, EMPACIS, and other trials I'm going to review about. So I'll start with the RAILS trial study, which is randomization and aldactone evaluation study. And what they did, NYHA 3 and 4 heart failure patients were studied who were having ejection fraction of less than 35%, and they were given ACE inhibitor, loop diuretics, digoxin, uh, and they were then given either spironolactone or a placebo, and then followed for 3 years for either a mortality, cardiac mortality, or hospitalization. All these endpoints were seen. What they found, all-cause mortality was less by 30%, cardiac mortality was less by 31%, and hospitalization for heart failure was less by 35%. So if we see all these basic line characteristics of these patients, what we found in RAILS trial, uh, all patients in placebo group were having loop diuretic and spironolactone also, and their the baseline drugs. So background drugs were almost same, like ACE inhibitor, digitalis, aspirin, potassium supplement, and beta blocker. So this reduction was more or less actually been evaluated as a uh, reduction because of loop diuretics and spironolactone aldactone combination. And there is again a FSS trial which was there to control the epinephrine post-acute myocardial infarction, heart failure efficacy, and survival study. This study designed to go for acute myocardial infarction having ejection fraction of less than 40% and having a congestive heart failure. So they were given standard of therapy. Almost 6,000 patients were been actually given this trial, and half of them received eplerenone 25 to 50 milligram, and half of them received placebo. And what they found, almost 1,012 deaths. And the results were eplerenone at the mean dose of 43 milligram reduced total mortality by 15%, CV mortality against CV hospitalization by 13%, and CV mortality alone by 17%, sudden cardiac death reduction by 21%, total mortality reduction by 8%. So eventually these effects were relatively consistent across the predefined subgroups. And if we find this FSS trials data, almost there was background data was almost same. So I'm now going to talk something about EMPACIS heart failure trial, which was there published in 2011, and it was actually meant for eplerenone in patients with systolic heart failure and mild symptoms. They studied almost 2,700 patients with NYHA class 2 heart failure. And what they did, the patient who had ejection fraction no more than 35, so less than or equal to 35% of EF patients were randomized over here. Then the eplerenone were given or a placebo were given up to 50 milligram daily of eplerenone, and then they seen for CV death and heart failure hospitalization. And what they found, 18.3% as compared to 25.9%. So hazard ratio of 0.63 is reduced if we are using eplerenone into these patients. So if we see the background therapy of all these EMPACIS heart failure patients, so then almost equal number of patients received ACE inhibitor, ARBs, and equal number of were given ACE inhibitor, ARB, or both. So if we see all these trials, beta blocker were also matching. So eplerenone and placebo arm were having equal all the parameters with hemoglobin and creatinine values also. So if this effect is seen, then it must be because of the drug eplerenone itself. And that's why aldosterone antagonists can be used in heart failure. And these three trials, like RAILS trial, uh, which was showing good reduction in the hospitalization heart failure or reduction in the risk of death, and then FSCS trial of acute MI patients of showing the similar improvement. It is good to use this type of molecules, and now we have evidences to support our views. And if we see hyponatremia, then there are various predictors of hyponatremia and mortality or hospitalization heart failure. If a patient every 3 millimole per liter decrease in the sodium level increased the risk of 6 month mortality by 23%. So if a patient is having 121 to 140, then there is increased percentage of mortality if a patient is having uh, up to 120 or less than 120. So this was studied by ESCAPE trial for 6 months mortality. And what is the prevalence of hyponatremia? So in a heart failure, 24%, and in cirrhosis, 28% prevalence was there. So frequency of hyponatremia can range up to 58% in patients with hospitalized for chronic heart failure and 49% in cirrhotic liver disease patients. So this is what we can definitely see. And tolvaptan is again a new drug, which is a vasopressor receptor antagonist. It is produces the water diuresis without electrolyte excretion and increases the serum sodium level. And uh, there is a IV formulation conivaptan previously available, but this tolvaptan is now orally available. It is also useful in heart failure patients. These two studies like Georged and Active in CHF were done, and they are showing that there is decrease in the body weight, and in hospital endpoint changes in the body weight of 24 hours were there, and adverse effects were also noted like dry mouth, thirst, and polyuria in this type of patients. So tolvaptan can be definitely safely used in heart failure as it reduces clear water from the body, keeping the solubles in the body. It is definitely helpful in regressing the heart failure symptoms. And there is now use of diuretics in resistant hypertension. I'm going to say a few more slides about this. Like, what is resistant hypertension? If a patient is having blood pressure of more than 200 by 90, irrespective of, or we cannot achieve a goal of less than 140 of 90 in our patients, then even after more than or 3 different drugs, and one of them must be a diuretic, then we can term this as a resistant hypertension. And 1 in every 20 hypertensive patients have this type of resistant hypertension. And ideally, all drugs must be at optimal dose before terming this as a resistance hypertension. And BP control uh, require more than 4 antihypertensive agents or different drug classes can be also termed as resistant hypertension. This is again a busy American Heart Association slide showing various steps of uh, management of this type of resistant hypertension. Like step 1 is we can ensure the sodium diet, optimize the 3 drugs, and we can exclude the other causes. If still BP is not at the target, naturally we need to substitute the optimal dose of thiazide like diuretics, like chlorothalonil to indapamide for the prior diuretics. And if still not we are getting the BP at the target, we can add mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist like spironolactone or eplerenone into this blood group patients. If still BP is not at target, then we can uh, go for heart rate checkup and we can add a beta blocker, or we can again, if still not better, then we can add hydralazine 25 milligram thrice a day, up titrate the dose up to 90 milligram daily. So we can have a monothiazide also used for this type of patients. And if still not at the target, then we need to substitute minoxidil 2.5 milligram 2 to 3 times a day to control the drugs. So this is what a resistant hypertension guideline as far as American Heart Association is concerned. And uh, there is use of thiazide diuretics, like top 3 classes, not necessarily in this order. And there has to be ACE inhibitor, calcium channel blocker, either spironolactone or clonidine. Uh, Either of them can be used. Then if fourth preferable drug is spironolactone, fifth drug is clonidine. So this is what pharmacotherapy for resistant hypertension as per the ACC-AHA. And the Journal of Clinical Pharmacology. And International Society of Hypertension, ISH, also says that spironolactone of 25 to 50 milligram can be effectively used for reducing the blood pressure when added to standard 3-drug regimen. And they are also good for treatment of resistant hypertensive patients. And this is a study which was being published by British Heart Foundation, and it was on spironolactone versus placebo on bisoprolol and doxazosin to determine the optimal treatment of drug-resistant hypertension. So it was pathway 2 trial, and what it interpreted, spironolactone was the most effective add-on drug for the treatment of resistant hypertension, and the superiority of spironolactone on the primary role of sodium retention in this condition were also been observed into this type of drugs. So again, if we see this REHOT trial, randomized study like resistant hypertension, optimal treatment, 12-week treatment with spironolactone or clonidine, almost 1,600 patients were randomized either of the arm, and what they found, spironolactone is preferable for the fourth drug therapy as compared to clonidine. So take home message from this whole presentation, like the angiotensin RS and aldosterone plays major role in the edema associated with heart failure and ascites and nephrotic syndrome. High efficacy of loop diuretic is being observed, and if you need high efficacy, then we must go for loop diuretics. If we want moderate efficacy, then we can use thiazide. If we don't want uh, too much efficacy or we don't want low efficacy, then potassium sparing diuretics can be used. Spironolactone again can be used with the loop diuretics in edema associated with congestive heart failure, and loop diuretics like torsemide and bumetamide are better than furosemide in our day-to-day practice. And if you are using diuretics in stage C heart HFrEF patient, then the indication of evidence is class 1 recommendation. HFrEF with fluid retention must be given these diuretics, and loop diuretics can be preferred over others. Aldosterone receptor antagonists are recommended in patients with NYHA class 2 to 4 who have ejection fraction of 35% or low. Aldosterone receptor antagonists are recommended in patients following an acute MI with ejection fraction of 40% or low with symptoms of heart failure or diabetes mellitus. And stage C HFpEF can be given aldosterone receptor antagonist if to reduce the hospitalization with heart failure. And intravenous loop diuretics are more potent than the oral loop diuretics. That is what we all know. But if you are giving loop diuretics like torsemide, then equal dose of in IV loop diuretics can be given as compared to oral. And there is also diuretic resistance noted in our patient, and thiazide diuretics or mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists can be combined each other to prevent diuretic resistance. And spironolactone is preferable for the fourth drug therapy for resistant hypertension in our day-to-day life. So from here, I'll just end this talk and I'll keep this session open for question and answer. Thank you very much for sound listening.
Thank you, Chaya sir, for this in-depth explanation of the subject and enlightening us with all the important aspects related to diuretics in chronic heart failure and resistant hypertension. So thank you for that. Now I would request the participants or the doctors who have joined us, if they have any questions, they can type it in the Q&A box below. Sir would be happy to answer them. You can type your questions in the Q&A box below. For time being, sir, till the time they type, we have received few questions. I'll just read it for you.
Yeah.
There is always a debate on giving bolus of diuretics versus continuous infusion. What is your view on it? What should be given in heart failure?
See, basically, we are using bolus diuretics if we are having acute heart failure. The debate, as I said, high dose of diuretics are not that effective as compared to giving them slowly infusions. But if you are giving any patient 20 milligram or 40 milligram of furosemide or 20 milligram of patient torsemide, then we can give similar dose IV as bolus, and then we can start with slow infusion. The recommendation again says the same thing. We can use either same dose as oral, or we can go for gradual infusion. Infusion works definitely better because they are providing slow and steady diuretics.
Sure, sir. We have received one questions in Q&A box. Someone is asking diuretic abnormalities. I think he's asking about diuretic resistance. What is your practical approach in such cases?
Yeah, as I said, diuretic resistance is common in practice if we are not following the guidelines. If a patient is having a proper dose, and if we are giving proper modality of treatment, and which naturally resistance is less found. Uh, but once we are finding it, then we can combine diuretics with mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, as I said in my previous presentation also, that we can combine with aldactone, or we can combine eplerenone, or also we can start giving IV diuretics. The most common reason is its non-availability. The reason is
Sure.
it's not been absorbed. As I said, furosemide is not absorbed in so many of our patients. So bioavailability is just 10 to 100%. And
Yeah.
in others, like if you are using torsemide, the bioavailability is 80 to 100. So if you are using in this such type of patients, naturally what we are going to see is diuretic resistance. But it's not only diuretic resistance, it's inadequate availability of diuretics in the blood. And so we need to enhance, we need to change the molecule. Like we can change from loop diuretic like furosemide to torsemide, or we can change to chlorothiazide, or we can add metolazone with these loop diuretics. Like we are using nowadays this type of activity to just control this diuretic resistance.
Very rightly said, sir. My next question was also same regarding the torsemide and furosemide. What is your preferred choice of drug?
Naturally, in current time, I'm using more of torsemide as compared to furosemide. Uh, but yes, if your patient is having hepatic failure or ARF, you can definitely switch either of the things. But in current times, we must follow the guidelines, and it's better to use better molecule in
Absolutely, sir.
this scenario.
Absolutely. Right. One last question we have, sir. Is there any role of spironolactone in management of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction and post-MI reduced ejection fraction?
If we see, actually this emphasis trial, it was done on actually eplerenone. It was not done with spironolactone. So I cannot comment on that line. But yes, previously we were using aldactone or spironolactone for reducing ejection related problems of HFpEF also. But in this current time, I cannot actually answer this particular question whether we can use it or not
Sure, sir. Sure.
for.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for taking all the questions and clearing the doubt of our viewers. Any concluding remark on today's subject?
So I'll definitely say that we must use diuretics if we are finding any patient with uh, reduced ejection fraction and very means having fluid overload. Then we must not hesitate combining diuretics with eplerenone or spironolactone or metolazone. And naturally, we need to keep an eye on potassium levels in all our patients. I think
Very rightly
that
said.
is what the
Yeah,
key, uh, particularly when we are using diuretics with ARNI agents.
rightly said, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Chaya, sir, for your concluding words. And thank you for sharing your valuable time and knowledge with us. It
Thank you.
was indeed a pleasure having you here, and we hope that we can meet again in near future on such important topics. Also,
Sure.
thanks to all the viewers who have joined us. What we can do is we will share you the edited YouTube video, the link of this video after permission from Chaya sir. So once he gives the permission, we can make it available for all the viewers and also for the sir. Till
Thank you.
next time we meet, on behalf of entire team of RPG Life Sciences, stay safe, take care, and goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good day. Stay safe.